Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're ready to go ahead and start Chapter 7, talking about essay items. Hope you can write, because that's exactly what you're going to do in an essay type of question. For essays, I think I'm going to change my ink color here to something different for the essays. For our essay items, quite simply, the test taker must write a coherent and informative response to a question or item. And I guess the key words here are coherent and informative. Because let's face it, you can get all kinds of stuff from a student that may not know what they're talking about, and they can just kind of, write their way to think that they're trying to answer, and think that they, by the number of pages that they turn in for that essay question, that you will be impressed. But it needs to be coherent and informative. That means we need to be able to understand it, what they're talking about. There ought to be some kind of logic behind it. And informative, that it tells us what we want to know. Second, they're good for use in testing higher level thinking. And that gets down into the situation where, can they integrate ideas? Can they see connections between things? Can they look at the theory and then translate that to the practical? That requires a much higher level of thinking to be able to kind of draw those kinds of parallels, those kinds of conclusions. Now, also, which is kind of a major concern here for essay questions, how well can they express themselves in a written format? If they possess rather limited writing skills, then let's face it, you're wasting your time and theirs, because they can't express themselves in a clear, coherent, concise manner. And so they are going to be very limited in their abilities with an essay question. When should we use some essay items? Well, essay items are the choice if you want an unrestricted response that will access higher order thinking. So if you want some real depth in the way that you want them to answer a question, then an essay question is the way to go. And they will be forced to have to, draw all these things together into a very clear, concise type of response that you're looking for. And what you can do there is to look for relationships between ideas, and then they are wonderful in looking at the pros and cons of an argument. One of the things I like to do when I used to teach the applied associate degree that we had years ago in the technical college system, before we moved to a different associate degree, but for a while we had one where we would teach the 5 Gen Ed courses at the technical school, and one of my jobs was to teach some of those. And one of the courses that I taught was environmental science. And that was a wonderful course to teach because, first of all, it pulled in a little bit of science, and also the environment here in southwest Louisiana is always very very important to the citizens and the people who live here. And so it was a wonderful course to get into some discussions about the environment. And so I would have a page, and I did my test on legal paper. I would put like 2 questions to that page, and they were essay questions. And what I wanted was to generate some controversial kinds of questions that I would force those students to tell me what they thought. Now, imagine 20, 30 people in a class, and nobody answers any questions, or else nobody speaks their minds. I try to draw out some responses from them, but sometimes you get some classes that were just kind of tight-lipped, and they just never said anything, and nothing you and I could do would have made them talk or try to respond. So I said, if I can't get your own ideas out in public, then I'll get it in writing. And so that's why I gave the essay questions. And I'd spend quite a bit of time reading those essay questions because I was really impressed by some of the ideas and some of the opinions that were expressed by some of these students that never said a word in class, that they were very aware of what was going on and had some opinions that I agreed with, and they had some opinions that I disagreed with, which was great. And so we would talk about those things after the test, and after a while they'd kind of loosen up a little bit, but towards the end of the semester. But there's always pros and cons, and essay questions are wonderful to be able to make the student look at both sides of an issue in their entirety and see how those things fit. Now, what do they look like? Well, you got 2 formats that you and I can use. One is the open format, where basically anything goes. They are unrestricted. And those are pretty much the ones that I would give in my environmental class. Don't hold back was pretty much every time I'd give those instructions in writing to tell them to not hold back on them. And your limits do not define the scope of the response. So I mean, they can go as deep into that subject as they feel comfortable doing. So these are probably the toughest to grade, because if you're asking for somebody's opinion, they're going to give it to you, right or wrong. Then you've got the opposite side of the spectrum, the close-ended, where you are restricting them, and so you set some definite limits on what they can and cannot respond to. And so they've got to work within those guidelines there that you've set. And these are a little bit easier to grade, because you can kind of have a list of the points that you think that are important, and then make sure that they cover those. And this is an example of, let's say, a unrestricted essay question. And notice how towards the bottom here you've got write as many pages as you think are necessary, and organize your answers as you see fit. Well, boy, you're opening yourself up for a long time to take the grade these things. And notice how the question itself is one of these really broad, wide open type of questions. But here you see an example of a restricted type. You read the question, it's a bit tighter, where you're kind of telling them, you're limiting them to what they need to discuss. Limit the response to 5 pages, no more. Don't write for longer than 2 hours. I don't know how many of our classes could get by with that. I'll tell you in just a minute my experience with essay questions on a personal basis at the end of this little discussion. But these would probably lend themselves more towards, I guess, the things that you and I deal with. Some guidelines to follow. Allow adequate time to answer the question. If you're going to ask them to write, then give them the time to get it done. Be sure the question is complete and clear. These are going to probably take a little bit longer for you and I to write, so that we can make sure that the question is clear to the student, and that they know exactly what is going to be expected of them when they create their answer. And obviously you can use them when you want to assess higher order thinking. And then you have all the test takers answer the same questions. Don't give out, like 5 essay questions and tell them to answer 3 out of the 5. Have everybody try to answer the same questions, because that's going to show some consistency when it comes to grading those things. Your mind will be focusing on specific questions rather than jumping back and forth, and so you can kind of be more objective in your grading there. And then you got your little table that kind of gives us the pros and cons of each one of these. As we've said before, essay questions are wonderful to help us see if students can make conclusions, can draw parallels, can use their higher order thinking to be able to see how things work and fit and influence each other. And so that is a wonderful tool to be able to try to get that kind of response from our students. Next, they increase security. Everybody's going to be writing their own little thing, and so you don't have to worry about them cheating off of each other, because everybody's pretty much focused on their own particular response to that essay question. They also provided some flexibility in the item design, in the question design. You can pretty much, you're pretty free to kind of put your essay question together, just making sure that they are clear and concise in what you're looking for. And they're pretty easy to construct. You don't have to worry about a whole lot of formatting with an essay question. All you got to do is leave enough space for them to write, or else tell them to do it on a word processor and turn in the pages. Or else one of the things we used to have were these little blue books. I think that's what they called them. It was a blue book that you bought at this college bookstore, and it was nothing more than a little book with a bunch of lines in it. And so you use that to kind of put your essay questions in, and just turned in the whole book to your professor or instructor for them to grade. So easy to construct. Formatting is no big deal. Now, what's the bad side? Well, let's take a look at those. because there's always another side to the story. They emphasize writing, and boy, I don't know a student that likes to write, but that's the nature of the beast. They are going to have to write, and they are difficult to write. If you've only got so much time to get the thing done, and you've got to get those things written, well, it just puts a much higher level of pressure on the student to be able to perform. Now, they provide an inadequate sampling of subject matter. You know, if you get really too broad on this stuff, you're not really focusing on what you think is important. And so, you know, you kind of have to worry about limiting yourself in the content that you've covered, because, you know, you can't make a test of 50 essay questions. That's just ludicrous. You know, you might have one or two or three, but yet you're going to have to focus on just one or two or three things that you're trying to test them on, rather than a regular objective test where you can just kind of sample all kinds of course material. And like we've been saying, they are hard to score. And then, I guess kind of like the flip side of the issue, that they test, but yet they emphasize writing skills over content. You know, we want to measure how well our students can write, then an essay question is usually what we use to kind of gauge that, really not what they know. It's just how well can they communicate. So those are your advantages and disadvantages of your essay questions. Some tips on how to score them. The scores should provide plenty of time to score each item. So give yourself enough time to grade the papers. Use a model correct answer as the basis for comparison. Just kind of have yourself a little outline there of what it is that you think should be mentioned in that essay question, and kind of underline their response and then check them off. Score each question across all test takers. So instead of doing like one person's test and just completing the whole thing at one time, put all your tests together and just score the first one. Then once you're done with the first one, put the pile back up and start on the second question. And go through them question by question rather than just paper by paper. And then score the responses without knowing the identity of the test taker. So if you kind of know the student, you might just kind of you know, score different students' essay questions differently. And so one of the things that I remember most of my teachers would do would be to put the essay questions on the back side of the test. And so like that, by that time, they had all of those front pages flipped over, and they were grading so many of them that they forgot whose test was which. And so they would just were able to be objective and not favor one student over another. That's another thing with the little blue books that I had mentioned. One of the things we had to do was to write our names on the front, and then there was another place to write your name like on the back, and the teacher would go out there and look at the front cover to see and just mark off whether or not we had taken the test, and then they would tear off the front cover and throw those away, and then proceed to grade the essay questions in the blue book. And then once they made their grading done, and then went and tallied up the scores, then you'd look at the back of it and see who got the grade. And so it was just another way to be objective whenever you're grading. So, to wrap up here, essay items are terrific for assessing sophisticated thinking skills. It's as good as it gets. They're fairly easy to develop, but they can underrepresent the content. You will be scoring those tests for a long time, and they may be unreliable. You know, how do you know that somebody's going to answer the question the same way over and over and over and over again? So that kind of messes up our reliability because of the variability of people's answers. And so I told you I'd talk a little bit about my experience with essay questions, and you know, I don't usually give essay questions at all in my coursework. I did, like I said, in that environmental science class because I thought it lent itself very, very well for some points of views that I was looking for. But I guess the worst set of essay questions that I ever had to deal with were when I was going through my doctoral work. There comes a point in there where you are ready to take what is called a qualifying exam. And the exam is an essay type exam where all of the coursework that you've taken is basically fair game for your for your professors on your committee to test you on. And so to kind of prepare for it, I studied for like maybe 6 to 8 months, looking over all of my coursework and trying to read up on things, try to stay current on a lot of different issues in vocational education. And then I was also given the opportunity to talk to each one of the members of the committee to just kind of see, okay, what do you think is important? And you know, they were more than willing to say, okay, these are the things that I think you ought to know about to help kind of focus my time and my effort. And you know, everybody does this. That's in grad school. But the day came to get questions from 5 different people, and you know, I had all kinds of restrictive questions where some professors were just saying, you know, talk about this part of the Carl Perkins Act, and I would start writing, start typing. Let's put it this way. So I typed for about 4 days, 7 o'clock to 5 o'clock. I must have typed well over 100 and some odd pages of responses. And I'll never forget, dear sweet lady, Dr. Betty Harrison. She gave me a question that I will never forget. And the question was, how is vocational education like a bird singing in a cave? Now, I'm going to tell you, that question just threw me for a loop. Basically because I was so wrapped up in facts, figures, theories, and so forth and so on, I was totally and completely unprepared for a question that would just require some creativity on my part, some creative thinking, some thinking, like the cliche says, out of the box thinking. And I'll tell you what, that one took about a half a day, and even today I can't remember what I wrote, if it was even slightly coherent. But later on, after all of that was said and done and over with, you know, I asked her about the bird in the cave question, and she said, that is why I put that in there. is to make you think that there's more to life than facts and figures. And so that's kind of, I guess, why I put those questions in for my environmental science students, to make them try to, come up with some creative things. And so I had fun with it, and let's face it, there was no right or wrong answer for the bird singing in the cave question. And so we just had a good laugh about it, and went on from there. So that should just about do it for essay questions. And if you want to try them. But remember, you got some work to do on the grading side. So this should wrap us up here for this particular chapter. And so we'll stop right here.